on this past summer?
I don't get summers. Well, or rather, I choose not to get summers.
Okay.
Summer vacations are very expensive, and my children are young enough that they are not in school yet, so I can do my vacations whenever I want.
All
So we
right.
are holding off, and we are off to celebrate Chinese New Year with some of my wife's relatives in Singapore and Malaysia when that comes
Nice.
around at the end of February.
That sounds wonderful. Kiara knows this, but I'm very interested in skylines and like general skyscrapers, and I'm very impressed with a lot of Malaysia's skyscrapers. So you'll have to take some great photos there. Well, we're 2 minutes in, and already we're talking about all things global, which weirdly worked out for that question. Thank God you weren't going anywhere domestic. Uh, so, for folks who are joining, for a little bit of context before we go into the deck, Numeric works with a whole slate of teams and increasingly folks who are operating pretty complicated accounting in a pretty complicated accounting landscape, have multiple entities, are international, or handling acquisitions. We get lots of questions about how can I do this effectively? And we thought of one person who can help us really answer this question. The folks over at Optimizely who have seen a really huge amount of growth. And so goal of our webinar today is to have Ben walk us through some of the playbook that he's encountered, to share some of the tips and tricks and hard lessons learned as his team has rapidly expanded, and to hopefully answer a slate of audience questions for people who are in the trenches themselves or trying to determine how to navigate this. So as we get started here, before we intro Ben and turn it over to him to get a sense of who's on the call and to make sure our chat is also working, would love to hear a little bit about what is the entity count that folks are currently operating with. How many different international entities does the team have? We'll see if anyone beats Ben. It would be hard, but it's definitely possible. And pop that in the chat. Anywhere between zero and you're just on thinking of proactive for the future to be on to that. And if no one chats in, then we'll investigate what's going on. All right, got a couple coming in. Thank you. Catherine says seven. Oh, Lynn, man. Okay, well, Ben, let's get you off. Get Lynn in. Caitlin 16. This is great. So we have a good chunk of folks on the call who are operating across really complicated global environments. If that is you, as Ben is walking through, one, feel free to drop in perspectives, and then would love to see some of your responses in the Q&A as well. Okay, well, with that, let's talk about our roadmap here. So first, we're going to begin with giving a little bit of context on Optimizely, which will hopefully help set the stage for the rest of our conversation. Ben has been a part of many mergers and acquisitions, and I would assume for folks who are dealing with a very large entity count, same. And so we are going to walk through some of the tips and tricks and sort of how he thinks about doing that successfully. Uh, Topic du jour is building a AI first team. There are some intricacies of doing that globally. There are also ways in which AI makes building a global team easier, and so we'll talk about that. And then we'll finally hit on the people and process component of all of this. So get a full blend of the tools, the people, the process, and then end with some Q&A. If you have questions throughout, feel free to pop them in, and we will make sure to answer those as well. All right, so with that, Ben, I'm going to turn it over to you to give a little bit of an introduction and give folks some context before we jump into the meat of it.
Great, thanks, Tierney. Thanks for inviting me to talk to you all today. My name's Ben. I'm the Senior Director of Accounting at Optimizely. Now, who are Optimizely? Well, Optimizely has been a leader in the digital experience space for many years. Our single guiding principle here is that we exist to make the lives of marketers easier. And this is a really exciting time because with our agentic AI capabilities in Opal, we're now officially an AI company as well. Join Numeric in that gang. Um, Opal is effectively an infinite workforce of marketing specialists that live within Optimizely's platform, fully context aware, brand aware, it can plan, draft, high quality, on brand content, and so much more. And a phrase that will come up a few times over the course of this conversation, I think, is when it comes to AI, context is king. So I joined Optimizely back in 2018 as a group accountant. And then over the last 7.5 years, I've had the incredible opportunity to grow with a really exciting business. The Optimize that I joined was about $80 million in global revenue, about 700 employees globally. Um, and over my tenure, I've seen in excess of fivefold revenue growth, nearly triple the headcount. My direct reports have grown from none as a group accountant to seven today, with nearly 30 people in my team overall. I've seen rebrands, ERP implementations, 7 acquisitions, sale of a company, refinancing. It's been quite a journey so far.
All right. Well, into that journey, Ben, I know you hit on a couple of these with the explosion of people on your team. Anything else you want to comment on what you've seen during your time at Optimizely, the scars and battle wounds maybe that you've
Scars
accumulated?
and battle wounds, hopefully not too many of those. But yeah, so my team now is, as I said, nearly 30 people across regional accounting, a global shared accounting services center, and a group accounting and projects team that looks at more one-off activity and transformation, those sorts of things. To answer the question that was put to everyone else at the beginning, I don't think we ever got up to the 50 entities that I saw as our leader. We were in the high 30s at one point. We've now, after a nice little entity rationalization project, got that down to 23 entities. But those 23 entities are spread across 14 countries. We cover, I think, 19 time zones at this point. So there are about, well, there are exactly 5 hours in every 24 hours that we don't have an Optimizely accountant working somewhere in the world. Um, we mentioned earlier sort of 7 acquisitions, roughly 1 acquisition a year, but those have tended to come in clusters because evenly spreading out acquisitions would make things far too easy for the team. So we like to do them at least in pairs.
All right. I love the stat of 5 hours when someone at Optimizely is not currently working on accounting. That's a good one. Well, talk to me a little bit about some of the milestones that you've seen, which I think we'll get on some of these in deeper depth across the course of this. But again, a little bit of context setting.
Yeah, sure. So whether you want to refer to these as milestones or key targets, this is, I think, what we need to work through when we're trying to build an international accounting team at this sort of scale. Um, Complexity is the enemy of scale. So I strive to try and keep things as simple as possible. The first step in that is always to focus on unifying systems, centralizing systems wherever you can as quickly as we can. I know we're going to dive into that a little bit more a bit later, particularly in relation to your core accounting system or ERP. And that's because this is foundational to enable everything else. When everyone is operating on a single system, a single source of truth, the next step is really to centralize and standardize processes and policies around the globe. The target should be in this step to operate as one team with one way of doing things, no matter where you are in the world. Um, this has always been important for global teams that want to scale. But today, I think it's more important than ever because standardization really enables teams to leverage AI in a much more impactful and meaningful way. Um, and I think we'll talk a little bit about other ways that AI can help in this step a little later. But I think one really undervalued tool here is templates. I was talking to our head of global accounting a little while ago about this, and I think it's clear to everyone that templates help to some degree with professionalism and consistency, but the real value of templates is that they increase efficiency. If you, as a preparer or a reviewer, know what something's going to look like before you even get there, you know where to look for numbers, you know where you're inputting your numbers every time. You take that thought out of the process, it allows you to get through a higher volume of work much more efficiently, much more quickly. Um, and then the final step that we've got here is to really bring all of your data together, your important data together. This step becomes more of a sort of company-wide initiative rather than a sort of finance-specific thing. But there's a huge opportunity when you can bring together data from across the organization. You can understand patterns, you can tell a more complete story. So whether you've got a well-built data warehouse or a more simple primitive data lake, pulling everything together in one place is really important. And it's a conversation that I would recommend starting as early as you possibly can, if you haven't already. You don't want to get to a place where you have thousands of customers, but no reliable way of linking the record between your CRM and your ERP to be able to tell that combined story.
All right. Well, talking about combined story, we will talk about combining companies in the M&A integration playbook. So this is something we talked a lot about, Ben, in prep for this, but maybe starting with the painful options ahead of you and how you think about painful 2 months or painful 6 months.
Yeah, so M&A can clearly make everything that we had on the previous slide a lot more difficult. But I think the message that we've got here is very clear. There's no such thing as a pain-free M&A integration for a finance team. There is going to be pain. There's going to be hard work, no matter how you approach it. The only question that you really have is how long it's going to last. M&A, no matter what the size of it, essentially doubles the work that you need to do. Every close, every report, every question that you need to answer, it takes twice as long until you've managed to fully integrate. If you put off the integration or you let one drag on for any longer than it needs to, all you're really doing is allowing that pain, that effort, that inefficiency to continue. I think if we move on to the next slide, go. The best thing that we can really do is make sure that we've got dedicated time, effort, resources to complete an integration as quickly as possible. Bite the bullet, rip off the band-aid, however you want to phrase it, as we had there. Just do whatever it takes to complete an integration as quickly as possible. And I recommend that you set a standard target of 2 close cycles. It will obviously vary depending on scale and resources available. But as a baseline, I think that's where everyone should start. Yeah, so how do we do that? Well, from day 0, or where possible, even before a deal is signed, finance leaders should be reaching out to all of the necessary stakeholders with one key message and one key question. The message is simple. We're planning to fully integrate this acquisition from a finance perspective within 2 close cycles. We need your help to do it. That's the message. The question that needs to be asked to make this possible is, what actually matters? What do we actually need? What do we actually care about? What level of detail do we need to report at? What historic periods are actually relevant? Is summary data going to be sufficient in some cases? Let's really narrow that down to make our life as easy as possible. And the answers to all of that will vary depending on the type of company that you are and the type of acquisition that you're doing. If you've got a load of large long-term contracts, you may need more history. If you're doing an acquisition that's more of a tech buy, but you don't really care about the customers, you're not going to want to bring in that detail. If it's not key to your story, don't spend any energy or resources on it. With that message delivered, we then move on to the mapping. I expect with any acquisition, with any M&A activity, a full trial balance and the latest set of management accounts on day 1, which should then be immediately mapped into your chart of accounts, your reporting format, whether that's something that you need to do yourself or whether it's something you get someone on your team to support with. The first pass on that should be done on day one. And there should be time then set aside on day two to review that mapping with the necessary stakeholders to make sure that everyone is aligned. Um, I also expect access to finance systems on day one, but that's not always possible. And where that's not possible, then I expect an example transaction report so that we can then start to build an understanding of the structure of the data, the level of detail, the granularity that exists that's available in the source systems. Once you know what really matters and what state the data's in, you can then focus in on the data migration, the data enrichment that you actually need, whether that's adding customer data to revenue for the last 2 years, or adding department tagging, whatever it might be that you need to be able to achieve your reporting aims. You can build a plan that really just targets the data points and the periods that you care about. And in those sort of next couple of weeks, building that plan should also involve, if the acquisition means that you're getting some new finance colleagues, it's at that time that you should really start introducing them to your ERP, start training them within those first couple of weeks, get their buy-in, get them on board. And then finally, by the time you get to that second close post-acquisition, the target should be that your primary ERP, in our case, NetSuite, is where all the transactions are being recorded and all of the reporting happens. You need to get away from manual consolidation, multiple reports, get back to that single source of truth as quickly as possible. This is that vital first milestone we talked about a little earlier. You cannot progress without this centralized system, this starting point. And to do all of this, you're absolutely going to need support from the wider organization. But fortunately, I cannot imagine a world where a CFO doesn't buy into this playbook, doesn't buy into this roadmap. If you're a CFO yourself, I expect this applies to you, but we're not. Any CFO will push whatever other parts of the organization they need to be able to effectively support a roadmap like this. And for any team that's been through months of double of everything because of a slow integration, it's going to be very easy to convince. Nobody wants to go through that pain for any longer than they need to more than once.
Well, seems easy then. No, uh, kidding, but when laid out like that, and that's something we had talked about in that what matters question is how do you think about data retention? And I think you had some really good proxies and a good framework for how to think about how to store different types of data.
Yeah, so I think it's a fair question to ask, right? If I only bring in detailed, enriched data for a fixed period and summary balances for historic periods, what about data retention requirements for things like tax filing? Perfectly reasonable question. But I think the answer to that is quite simple. The data that existed before the acquisition, in whatever form that took, would have been good enough if the acquisition never happened to meet these requirements. So, sure, we need to keep that data, but do we need to enrich it? Do we need to map it into our system? No. The data and the detail that matters, that can live in NetSuite, that can live in your ERP. The rest can be archived as raw data somewhere else. So we have it, it's accessible, but we haven't put any time or energy into that.
All right. And then part of the challenge of mergers and acquisition is obviously the data and the system, but that's not it. And
That is not all.
is how every country has its own nuance. And so I think, yeah, would love to hear a little bit about how you think about some of the complexity outside of the ERP.
Yeah, I think that's a really good and an important call out, right? Additional thought is needed whenever your M&A activity is in a new territory to you, many countries have unique regulatory, reporting, tax, or other nuances that are specific to that territory. But all of those nuances should just contribute to the answer to that first question, right? What matters? If it matters locally, then it still matters. So identify those nuances, identify those factors, and just build them into that plan.
And an example we had talked about was Vietnam, which has some interesting intricacies.
Uh, we did. And fortunately, we've got an incredible team in Vietnam. Shout out to them if anyone's listening. Um, yeah, Vietnam I thought was interesting because there are two specific nuances. One, which I think is the most unusual in my experience, is that when reporting in Vietnam, you're legally required to use exchange rates from the Vietnamese central bank. So when you have a transaction in a foreign currency, it's the Vietnamese central bank that set that day's exchange rate into VND. You can't just rely on the daily exchange rate that you're pulling into your system from whatever third party integration you may have. The rate on every transaction, every foreign currency transaction needs to be checked against the central bank rate and manually adjusted if there's a difference. Usually you would have a local bookkeeper, or if you're lucky enough to have a local team managing that. And even more fortunately, I've never encountered an ERP that doesn't allow you to do that, but it's something that you need to be aware of. Otherwise, you're building up a bit of a historic data headache for yourself. Um, the second nuance um, in terms of Vietnam is one that is much more common, which is that in Vietnam, under Vietnamese accounting standards, there is a prescribed chart of accounts. You can't just use your own. The specific accounts, the names of those accounts are set out within the standards. But does that mean that you need to create an entirely new and separate chart of accounts for these entities, these territories, breaking that one way of doing things? No, it doesn't. What we did to solve this was we created a custom hidden field in NetSuite that's only visible on reports built specifically for Vietnam. And we mapped the Vietnamese accounting standard chart of accounts to the best fit equivalent in our chart of accounts. And then when we do that, nothing breaks. There's always a creative solution to accommodate some of these nuances. And the target outcome should always be one system, one chart of accounts, one process, one way of doing things, even if it means that there's two ways of reporting on something on the back end.
All right. Gets us into one of your takeaways on talk to someone who knows more than you, as you can't be an expert in everything.
Uh, Absolutely not. I guess the obvious follow-up question to that previous topic is, how do you know what these nuances are? And look, there's no such thing as a global accounting tax expert that's fully aware of the rules and regulations and requirements in every territory on it. That's not a thing. No one is expecting anyone to be that. So what we do is we accept the gaps in our knowledge, and we make sure that whenever we enter a new territory, whether that's through M&A or the creation of a new subsidiary internally, however you're doing that, we obtain necessary local advice, local expert advice. Um, Often, if it's part of M&A, this will have actually started as part of the due diligence process, but unfortunately not always. But either way, it is a necessary investment. But AI can help here. Historically, we would have largely gone into those conversations blind or with a hurriedly pulled together Google search of topics to discuss. But AI can help. Um, I would really recommend that anyone going into any of those conversations with local experts actually just asks AI the same questions first. Don't blindly trust it. The quality and the accuracy of that information will vary drastically depending on how common it is for the territory that you're looking to go into to operate internationally. So if you're looking for this sort of information on India and accounting things in India, which has a long history of being an outsourcing territory, you get good AI responses. For somewhere like Vietnam or Colombia, another territory that we operate in, not so much. But as a minimum, if we're going to AI first, AI will arm you with the right questions to focus the conversation to get the advice that you really need. In better cases, that more targeted conversation will give those expensive experts some less scope to work with and less scope to bill you for. So you can save money by going to AI first here.
All right, which brings us right into our next topic. So now that we've covered some of the high level, how do you run an M&A playbook effectively? I want to hear a little bit about how your team has worked to become AI first. I think we're all trying to figure out what the hell that means still. But maybe starting with some of the mandate that I found was really interesting in our conversation around the volume of general oxygen that is going towards AI over time at Optimizely and how that's changed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a great illustration of the change in the focus and prioritization AI has had over the last 12 months. If we look back at our Optimizely board deck from summer last year, AI was mentioned in 3 slides, less than 5% of the deck dedicated to AI. Our latest board deck, that was well over 40% of the slides referencing AI. And you may think, with my intro earlier, Optimizely being a tech company moving more into the AI space, that of course that would be the topic. But I think the really interesting takeaway here is that about a third of those slides were looking at our internal AI story. So how are we planning to leverage AI to improve our own operations? And the takeaway message from that to me is pretty clear. Boards are expecting companies to develop clear plans to leverage AI to drive value internally. And there is also some early evidence that's starting to show that companies' internal AI story is having an impact on valuations and outcomes in M&A, exits, those sorts of things. So really, really important. Um,
All right, so let's get into some of the internal AI story. Maybe less about the story, actually, more about the tactics of how your team has thought about implementing AI.
yeah, sure. I think we may be on this slide for a little while, but I think it's important, and that's okay. Um, yeah, I wanted to share a few simple-ish, easy to implement examples of how we've started to leverage AI today. Firstly, I think we should recognize where finance professionals and AI might have skills that complement each other. Finance people typically good with numbers. AI, LLMs, they're great with language, words, large, complicated documents. That's where AI has been able to shine for a long time. So we can use AI to extract the accounting implications from contracts, whether that's a customer contract where we're identifying clauses with potential revenue impact or a lease agreement. We've had some real success in feeding those contracts into something like a chat GPT and asking it to extract the clauses with an accounting impact, and even then using it to draft the accounting memo for that associated contract. And on the revenue side in particular, there are multiple providers out there that manage this sort of thing at scale. But even without investing in a dedicated system, teams can get AI to review contracts for unusual deals or new leases on a case by case basis with something more readily available like a chat GPT and really get efficiency and value that way. Um, and then another example where we can leverage the language strength of AI would be policy and process documentation. Now, this is important for that second milestone that we talked about earlier. If you don't have that documentation in place, AI will very effectively draft that documentation for you. You could even go so far as to provide it with a template and a list of specific policies that you need. And you've got a ready-made draft policy library that would have taken days to weeks for a human to write within an hour. If you've already got those policies in place, AI can help with reviewing those and keeping them up to date. We've had good success with just feeding in a sample of policies or a section of our policy library and just asking the AI to review those policies against any new accounting guidelines, also providing some context around changes in the business, perhaps. And within minutes, you have a review that would have otherwise taken a few hours of sitting through and reading through. The really easy wins there. Moving away from the more simplistic language-based uses, the first example that we've got here is doing quick dashboards, visualizing data. This is an area that I've had some real success myself. And there are two approaches to this sort of dashboard data visualization idea, but they both start the same way. You need good quality data and you need to provide clear context. Said it before, context is king. And the better the context, the more meaningful the results. But you feed in the data, provide the AI with some context about that data and the objectives of the dashboard. You then have your two choices. You can either provide really clear, specific instructions on the KPIs and the charts that you want to see, and that can be really useful. You can do that really quickly. But the other option that can be useful as well is to be much more generic with your request. Simply ask for the data to be analyzed for patterns or anomalies and report those results. And doing that can lead to answers to questions that you hadn't even thought to ask yet. So I did this with actually the numeric checklist data a little while ago, hoping to see if we were improving our speed over time. And with some vague prompting in what I wanted to see, I unintentionally learned that there are some consistent star performers and a few not so good performers that I was then able to go away and address in a really targeted way. That wasn't what I was trying to do, but meaningful actions coming out of that. Lastly, on here, this flux analysis piece. This is an area that numeric has been a bit of a game changer for us. We have a large team across the world working on the close, and an important part of the close is understanding the change in numbers month over month, understanding what's going on. And to be able to generate clear explanations with as much historical context as we'd like, tailored to templates that we want at the touch of a button is amazing. And I mentioned more than once that context is king. And I know Numeric recently released an update allowing additional documentation to be uploaded to provide more context in those flux analysis. And that's been really interesting to play around with so far. There's some really valuable analysis coming out of that pretty quickly. And having AI handle these things frees up the team to ask more meaningful questions and add value in a more meaningful way.
All right. Well, with that, I think a high level takeaway, and I think gets to that last point, Ben, is how AI is not just maybe saving work from accountants' plates, but also fundamentally shifting where the role is focused on.
Yeah, so this framework that I call the three levels of what is one that I've had and shared with the team for a number of years. Um, and it's essentially the levels that you go through in building a high performing, value adding finance function. And the initial level is just understanding what happened, asking what happened, recording transactions, reporting results. That's it. Level two, which is where most finance teams find themselves eventually, is being able to ask not just what happened, but so what? What does that mean? What story are these numbers telling us? What impact does it have on the forecast, etc. Um, but the final level, the real value add that finance teams should strive for, is to start to be able to ask what if on behalf of the business, and this is really what I think finance business partnering should be. Often, finance business partnering still falls within that level two. It's just those conversations are happening with other parts of the business. But as a finance team, we are privileged in access to data. We are privileged in the tools that we have. We are privileged in our understanding of forecasting and modeling. So we should be striving to be able to ask, what if we changed this? What if the process changed in this way? Could we be more efficient? What does that do to the numbers? Now, the message that I used to share was that it's okay to start at level one. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think level one here is where AI lives. That's where AI is going to take over. So, as an accountant now, you have to be able to operate from the beginning at level two of this framework. Um, Throughout all of these, there will be an AI component supporting in one way or another. But you cannot just do the what happened bit anymore. And I think an important part of this is that finance leaders, frankly, all leaders, need to be encouraging their teams to embrace AI, experiment with it, bring their own ideas forward. Um, it's going to take everyone to really take maximum value from this. So
And I think maybe a brutal recap here on the slide, Ben. One of the quotes that came from our initial conversation of they're really we are moving beyond a just posting journals and reconciling accounts world. And I think a lot of the folks in the audience probably feel this. And so I think that last recap slide with the three levels sort of shows what's next as well. Well, that navigates us into people and process, which kind of the opposite or complement maybe to our conversation on AI, getting into how do we think about building that global team with the right people, the right skills, maybe beginning with the right accountability. So I would love to hear a little bit about how you think about laying the framework for your team.
yeah, so managing a large team at scale requires one thing above everything else, and that is trust. And trust is built through effective communication. I tend to lean towards an excess of transparency, certainly more so than some other leaders that I've worked with. But an important part of that core communication is setting clear expectations. But expectations on their own are meaningless. You drive the meaning from by holding people accountable against expectations. And how do you effectively hold people accountable? Well, you do that through measuring performance to the extent that you can against those expectations. You put in place effective team performance KPIs And then those team performance KPIs should get the same level of visibility with the team as financial KPIs. I think I also make it clear to my team that doing your job, doing an excellent job at your job, producing quality output, that just means you're meeting the expectations that I've set. To really be exceeding expectations, I expect my team to go beyond that. So that could be demonstrating meaningful enhancements or efficiency through changes they've made, or just going beyond their role in some other way.
All right. And I think part of that is because you simply cannot, even if you try, be awake at all the time when your team is, given the time zone overlap. So, would love to hit on you set these expectations, you have the metrics, but how else are you thinking about ensuring people have the right context when they can't Slack or message you to maybe ask the questions that are top of mind for them?
Um, yeah, so absolutely right. You can't answer questions, you can't approve things, you can't manage a team while you're asleep. And that's when empowerment is really important. So you can set expectations, you can build that trust for a team to operate effectively. But for them to do that across multiple time zones, they also need to be empowered to do that job without your help or approval. So for a team to be empowered, I think you need three things. You need access to the information to be able to do the job. So that's making sure that you're doing what you can to break down silos, avoid gatekeepers of data, making sure that the information is accessible. The second thing that I think you need is access to the tools to be able to do the job. That's the right access to the right systems with the right permission levels to be able to do what needs to be done. And then lastly, there needs to be an awareness that they've got the authority to act without checking in on you. That's tied to the trust, but I think often needs to be explicitly communicated and reinforced. And mistakes can never attract blame. They have to always be an opportunity to learn and to improve. And I think this is another area where I think numeric has helped us. So the numeric checklist, the task list, we have a single source to track all of our tasks and deliverables, not just those associated with month end, and that's incredibly valuable. Having that sort of structure of tasks with owners, dependencies built in, links to process and policy documentation right there on the task is a really convenient way to have some baseline expectation in place that you don't need to be there to manage. And because everyone can see it, it then enables the team to hold themselves and each other accountable without manager intervention. Um, if you can see that your task is blocked and you can see who owns that, then you can reach out and help resolve that blockage without needing manager input.
All right. And maybe finally, as we talk about the global team, we've talked about some of the cons and the difficulties of trying to wrangle across time zones, but it's also a huge competitive advantage. And I really appreciated hearing how you think about how a global team is uniquely equipped in some ways to tackle really complicated accounting challenges.
Yeah, look, this is something that I deeply believe, right? Diversity of cultures, of backgrounds, of points of view is a huge opportunity. It shouldn't be viewed as a challenge. Many companies, when they're doing M&A, they will make the mistake of thinking, how do we get this acquisition on board with our culture ASAP? When what they should really be thinking is, how can this new culture add to what we already have? That diversity can bring ideas and solutions that you'd have never thought of. But, we were talking a little bit at the beginning about the advantages of young children when it comes to vacation times. And one thing that I've learned having two young daughters, one that has a big brain and the other that's much more brawn, just something of a bulldozer. Um, they've taught me that there are almost always multiple solutions to a problem. that other people might never think of. So you see something out of reach, and one solution to one person may be to pull up a chair and climb up to reach it. The only solution that the other would think of is to push over the table to get to what was on the table. And I think leaders should view their teams in that same way. Teams, particularly diverse, multicultural teams, can bring ideas that you would never have thought of, and they should be encouraged to be themselves and bring those ideas.
All right, let's hope the two daughters are not on the webinar. No, or maybe they'll view those as as
This
comp.
recording will have to last a long time. They are
All
one
right.
and so we're probably safe.
Well, now that we've covered a good chunk of different topics here, from everything from M&A to how we think about people and process, we'll open the floor to any questions in terms of Ben's experience, diving a little bit deeper to anything that we covered as we wrap up here. Have a couple last minutes.
And I know we already have a couple of questions, so I'm going to go ahead and just start with those as people are thinking of others. So from Stephen or Stefan Kane, he says, can you please explain on archiving data in NetSuite? How is this done without impacting consolidated numbers?
Okay, so what I was referring to there is really historic data from legacy systems rather than from NetSuite itself. So say you acquire an entity that manages its finances through QuickBooks. Rather than extract all of that data and transform it and enrich it and migrate it at a transaction level detail for all of history into NetSuite, you can take summary data for historic periods if that works, right? It depends what matters. So you're going to be extracting all of that data anyway. Transforming it, enriching it takes time, effort, resources. For the history where it doesn't matter, don't do that. Just take that raw data that you've extracted from QuickBooks, store it in a data warehouse, somewhere you can access it if you ever need to. And then, yeah, summary information will be brought to NetSuite. NetSuite can consolidate with monthly totals. It doesn't need transactions to do that. It doesn't need any more information than the bare minimum, unless it matters, right? If it really matters, you should be going through that effort.
Great. And then we have another one here from Catherine, and she's asking what systems and platforms are you using for developing your dashboards?
Oh, I played with multiple tools. So I think important message when it comes to experimentation with AI is just to be careful with confidentiality of the data that you're using. If you have anonymous, non-company specific, unidentifiable data, then I don't think any IT department is going to have an issue with using whatever tools you happen to enjoy playing with or you've had success with. I've had success with Gemini. I'm a big fan of Gemini, but for more confidential, more sensitive data that we couldn't just put out there, we have a company version of ChatGPT, which has also been incredibly effective. Yeah, I don't have one great platform or tool that I can point people in the direction of. It's still very much a case of experiment, see what works, see where your data is best interpreted, and run with that.
Yeah, great. And then we have one more question here from an anonymous attendee. It says, as the role of the accountant becomes increasingly aligned with your what level 2 and evolving to include FP&A type analysis, how would you recommend that be managed in organizations that have a separate FP&A team to mitigate the risk of duplication of effort? Great question.
It is a great question. And this is actually a topic that I know Parker at Numeric has talked about, and it's something that I've spoken to him about as well. Like that dual lane accounting world is not going to exist for that much longer, I don't think. It doesn't need to. What will exist is a middle ground of people who understand and can interpret accounting requirements and guidance. You don't need the in-depth knowledge. AI will answer that question, but can also business partner can do scenario modeling and understand what that looks like. That merged finance world is where we will end up. How you manage that coming from a world where there may well be very much established lanes in your organization is a great question. I think the only thing that I can really recommend is making sure that you are working as closely as you can across those two lanes, taking any project or any other opportunity to sort of cross skill and develop. Those lanes they're not going to crumble overnight. They are lanes is probably not the right word for them. Trenches is probably a better characterization. It will take a long time for those to break down, but making sure you're developing those relationships, skills, taking the opportunities you can to get involved in more FP&A style projects if you're an accountant or vice versa is the way to go.
All right. Well, what a good note to wrap up our webinar on, and thinking a little bit about the future, thinking about the trenches that we occupy. I love that language. For folks who are on, we will follow up with a recording. So if there are parts here that you thought might be helpful for other people on your team to revisit, or any of the slides, we'll also follow up with that slide deck coming your way and have a recap of some of this conversation. So thank you to everyone who attended. Thank you, Ben, for showing up, for preparing with us, for having a really thoughtful conversation on a whole host of topics. I think a lot of folks learned a lot, including myself, on how to manage a global team. And yeah, once more, folks, thanks for joining, and we'll see everyone on our next webinar.